Welcome to Book Club. I'm really into fun facts. Julie has an endless array of pop culture knowledge. Overall, I would say I liked it.
Something about the way she writes is like really concrete and immediate. Who is this man? Why is he in this costume? Like, why did he drop a squid? Like, you teased some juicy deets about the creation of this book.
This is, again, what Victoria finds interesting, not what is actually most important about these people.
What stories are we going to tell ourselves about this year?
Welcome to the party.
Welcome, guys.
Welcome to Book Club.
With Julia.
And Victoria.
We are two roommates and friends since high school who read a book and talk about it each episode.
This is a podcast where we explore new perspectives and use books as a tool for personal and community growth.
This week, I'm so excited. We are reading The Giver by Lois Lowry, this dystopian queen. There are major spoilers in this book. We will be going over them. I know this book is older than we are, but we will be going over spoilers. So if you are a person who cares about that, you have been warned.
And if you don't care about it, you're welcome here too.
Absolutely.
It might, color your opinion of what you're reading when you read the book.
Yeah.
Or you'll be like me and you completely forget the ending of most things. Though I am pretty proud. This one I remember pretty strongly. I remember the ending of this book. The first time I read this, I think, was 2012 when I was on a family vacation. And for whatever reason, my mom brought along The Giver, or maybe one of us had it, one of my brothers or I, and we decided to read it aloud to each other in the car. We were our own audiobook. I don't think, I was trying so hard to remember. I don't think I had read it before then.
Mm-hmm.
And we got to the ending. And my dad, who was actively listening, but also quietly driving the entire time, was appalled. He was like, what? That's the end? We're ending on that cliffhanger? And my parents, both of them, were like, what? I told my mom we were doing this book for this episode. I asked her, when was that vacation? I don't remember. And she's like, I really hated the ending of the book, but I'll have to listen to the episode to see. Maybe you'll change my mind.
Oh my god.
So, Mom, if you're listening, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, well, we'll see.
I remember really enjoying it, and I think more in comparison is I tried reading the second book, and I was disappointed because the first one was so captivating. The second book in the series didn't captivate me as much. I honestly don't know if I finished it. So I know some people are diehard fans of the whole quartet of books, but I've only read The Giver. I haven't read The Messenger or The Sun, and only read part of Indigo Blue. So
Gathering Blue.
Gathering Blue. What was your experience reading The Giver?
Okay, well, this is sort of my villain origin story because I was a diehard Lois Lowry fan in middle school. I, up until middle school, had been mostly reading Nancy Drew, Boxcar Children. What's the Treehouse one where they go back in time?
Oh, the Magic Treehouse.
Magic Treehouse. I was like, is it really the Magic Treehouse? Yeah, it's the Magic Treehouse. Okay.
Those were great. I love those.
Yeah, those, I think.
Maybe we'll have to revisit those on the show.
Yeah, that's probably where you and our interests coincided.
Yeah.
In our youth. Because it was history, but it was also magic.
Yeah.
And those were really fun. So I was mostly reading stuff like that. And then my literature teacher, I see the memory so vividly in my mind, and I have no context for it. I don't know if it was during class or if it was after class or whatever. But I'm standing there browsing. She had an entire wall of books that you could just grab at any point you wanted. She had her own library, basically. And I think she owned all of them. These were all her books. She was my hero. And so I was browsing the books, and she walks up to me and she's like, what kind of books do you like? And I told her, and she kind of gives me this knowing look, you are the chosen one. I'm going to give you this book. Not a lot of 7th graders can handle it, but Julia can handle this book. I think you would love this. I don't know if she actually said all that or if that is what I interpreted from her actions, and she just said, this is a really good book. She might, it was presented to me as this is grown-up girl literature, this is something real serious. And I felt very important that I was chosen to read it. So ridiculous. And I think I read it in, I don't know, a weekend and absolutely loved it. I was enthralled. I learned that I love dystopian novels and then proceeded to read every single Lois Lowry book I could get my hands on, except, ironically, Number the Stars, which is the one most kids read.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've even read, like, all her obscure stuff, like The Willoughbys and Gossamer and Silent Boy, like, books no one has purchased, as far as I'm aware. But the sort of Giver quartet, I was obsessed with. And then Sun came out while we were in high school, and I didn't know she was making a 4th book, and it was like Christmas had come again. It was the most exciting, and it's like 4 times bigger than the other ones.
Oh,
it's
wow.
like hefty. And it's the story of Gabriel's mother, and it's much more magical than the other. Well, Messenger's pretty magical. They get increasingly more magical as the series goes on, and it was really good. I really want to read that one again. Basically, Lois Lowry is the author who, like, convinced me to be, like, a serious reader and who made me want to find more meaningful books. Like, you could have genre and depth at the same time, and, like, that was what I was most interested in. So I see the Giver as, like, a very important moment in my reading journey.
Okay, so Lois Lowry is famed children's book author now, but she was born in Hawaii in 1937. I did not realize how old she is, but she's still alive. She's in her 80s. Her father was in the military. I think he was, like, a naval dentist or an army dentist. He was a dentist, but in the military.
Interesting.
So she moved a lot. They lived in New York for a while. Then her dad was deployed in World War II. And her family moved to Pennsylvania to be close to her mom's family. After the war, her family lived in Tokyo for her, like, 7th and 8th grade years. And then she returned to New York City for high school. She attended Brown University in Rhode Island. And after her 2nd year, she was only 19 years old, she got married.
Whoa.
She married someone who's also in the military. And so together, after she graduated, they moved to California, Connecticut, Florida, South Carolina, Massachusetts, and they had 4 children along the way. In the 70s, her and her first husband split and she remarried. And I think her second husband, they were together like 30 years until he passed away in 2011. And her website is like a very long, it definitely feels like your grandma sat down and just gave her whole like history.
Oh my god.
Like she barely talks about her writing. She's talking about her
Aww.
children and her grandchildren and her dogs and like her husbands. And so yeah, her second marriage was 30 years. And then after he passed, she writes how like she didn't think she would like, who would think she'd fall in love again in her 70s, but she did. And so she lives with her, I forget his name, another man in Maine. And when she had initially moved to Maine, this is much farther back, was a graduate student at the School of South Maine, and that's where she kind of launched her writing career, was after her graduate program. So it sounds like she finished up undergrad, had 4 kids. She had 4 kids in 5 years.
Ooh.
Yeah. And then after they were like settled a little bit more, she went back to get her advanced degree and start her career writing. So The Giver came out in 1993, and she had already at this point won a Newbery Medal for Number the Stars, which came out 3 years before that.
Wow.
So yeah, a very active writer. Looks like she's had books come out basically all the time. Until probably like the last 10 years, it looks like she's slowed down. Though she did have a book that came out in 2020, The Willoughbys Return.
There's a sequel?
There's a sequel.
Oh my god! I need to get back into it.
Yeah. Oh, one last little anecdote that I thought was interesting. When Lois Lowry was notified that she won the Newbery for The Giver, she was in Antarctica. And they couldn't reach her. They couldn't find her. They sent like a radiograph or something.
Oh my god.
Down to Antarctica.
Why was she in Antarctica?
I don't know, but it was really cute. On her website, she wrote, "I was on top of the world, but literally I was on the bottom of it." Yeah, I don't know. She has an interesting life. I would encourage people to read stuff on her website. I was going to read the whole thing, and I was like, this is going to be 15 minutes of me just reading her bio. But, so she seems like, you know, everyone's favorite grandma.
Yeah.
She's just gushing about her children and her grandchildren, and I'm like, oh, and also she's had this, like, wildly successful writing career.
Yeah.
That's, you know, very much of note as well.
Yeah, I think she's the best. And I should find more of her books now.
Yeah.
Because I just sort of grabbed whatever was available in Barnes & Noble under her name. Everything. I just would buy it. But they didn't stock very many of her books. They just would stock the recent ones.
Right. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I should dig into her older stuff. Anyway, I will summarize The Giver. So many people have read this book, at least in the education system in the United States. And there was a movie. I'm sure a lot of people know this, so I will be brief. There is this very creepily perfect community where everything is exactly the same and sort of cookie cutter, and they have kind of funny names for things that are more generic, like new child and 12s instead of a 12-year-old, stuff like that, where it's like slightly different, but you know what they're talking about. And then you follow this character of Jonas, who's about to turn 12, and that's when they're assigned their future careers. And there's a big ceremony for it.
Literally called their assignment.
Yes, it's literally called the assignment. It's this really tense moment. They're all in this big ceremony and he gets skipped. And then at the end, he's brought up on stage and it's announced that he's going to be the new receiver of memory. And you're like, that sounds creepy. What is that? But no one knows. And he shows up for his lessons, and basically this guy who just calls himself the Giver explains that there's a whole history outside of the community that he lives in, and only one person in the community is responsible for bearing all the memories of the history of the world outside of their little bubble, including memories of the senses, like colors and music and sunshine and warmth and but so there's all the pleasant things and then all the really horrible things as well, like war and pain and suffering. And his job is to transmit those memories into Jonas. And so Jonas has sort of awakening as he learns all these new things over the course of a year. He sort of realizes how messed up his world is. And then the breaking point is when he realizes that his community kills people very expediently. They're just like, oh, you are a twin who is slightly less healthy than the other one. We're gonna kill you. You're past a certain age. We're gonna kill you. You, broke a certain rule, but they don't call it that. They call it being released.
Yeah.
And so he doesn't know what that is, but he's learned the concept of death through his memories, these memories. And so then he finally discovers what his community is doing, and that this child that he cares about is due to be released the next day. And so he runs away, not really knowing what he's going to find. And that's where it ends. On that fun little cliffhanger. That's the book.
Yeah. This podcast is made possible by our fantastic book club members. You can support the show by becoming a member on buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjv. Starting at $3 per month, book club members can connect with fellow listeners, help us select books for future episodes, unlock exclusive posts and messages, get early and discounted access to future events, and more. And if you want to take your support to the next level, you can join the TISM tier, which starts at $5 per month. The TISM tier is all about autism. Are you an autistic person looking for community? A possible neurodiverse person looking for resources? Or an ally hoping to learn more from an actually autistic person? Members of this tier get free access to Julia's autism-related articles on Medium. The best part of any book club, besides the books, is the community. So join us in our growing community of book nerds by becoming a member of the book club today. Follow the link in our show notes or go to buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjv to join the party. That's buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjv. We'll see you there. So like many dystopian novels, this one definitely feels like it's trying to tell us something.
Yes.
one thing that I think works really well is that it doesn't feel heavy-handed,
Mm-hmm.
like what Lois Lowry is trying to communicate to the reader. And I think there's a lot of ways you can read it. There's like a general sense of like knowledge is power kind of deal.
Mm-hmm.
History and context is important for, you know, enriching our lives. Just kind of those like vague notions. But while you and I were kind of prepping for this episode, we were thinking about like, is there certain lenses we can read this through? Is there specific critiques we think this book is making about our society that we live in, and that Lois Lowry is writing from? And so we were kind of reading this as like a critique and a metaphor for whiteness, as well as dominant culture in general. But whiteness being a dominant culture here in America.
Yeah. We're not saying that that's what she intended to do, because we have no idea.
Right. We did not call Lois Lowry up and be like, hey, Lois, so we're reading a book from like 28 years ago, and we need to know what you were thinking when you wrote it.
Yeah.
No, that's not what we're doing.
But there's so many parallels between the problems of this sort of myth of whiteness that have sort of been imposed on the world that have these really negative effects, and this book sort of amps those up. And so you can see kind of the really extreme version. If whiteness is allowed to carry itself all the way to its natural conclusion, you would get a community that looks very much like this one. And so, you know, the point of dystopia is to see the most extreme example of the problems that are currently in society and see what happens. So that's what we're going to do today.
Yeah, and I particularly like this kind of analysis, like when you use a certain lens to read a book, where you use the book to kind of inform a specific aspect of your society. I find it really, I don't know, a really interesting and engaging way to read specifically fiction, especially when it's maybe a little bit more removed from like our actual everyday life. And I like that you made a point to call out, like, we're not saying this is what Lois Lowry is saying. We're saying like, hey, if we think about whiteness in American culture next to this story, what does it kind of illuminate? What does it bring to light?
Yeah, absolutely. And it, you know, she may not have intended this, but she obviously was raised in white culture, in whiteness. So, like, she may have been pulling from things that we now have names for that she maybe didn't at the time. You know, we don't know.
Yeah.
But this is what we see in the book, and we're putting them next to each other, like you said.
So to start,
Yes.
one of the very first things you get in this book is a really interesting, to put it lightly, relationship with feelings.
Yes.
So overall, I would say it's probably like a suppression of feelings.
Yes.
And as Jonas starts receiving the memories, he's introduced to the idea of loneliness, of pain, of happiness and joy and family. And like it's almost like heartbreaking when he realizes what love is, even though he has this, like, you know, the structure of a family unit and a sibling and parents and friends, but he doesn't feel love. And it feels like a very meaningful thing at the end when him and the giver both express the love they have for each other.
Yeah.
But the suppression of feelings is kind of the way that the community maintains control over everyone. And it's not that feelings are completely ignored. They do have what, honestly, Julie pointed out, it's like not a bad thing to do with your family, is sit around and be like, what was a feeling you had today?
Yeah.
And Jonas, when early in the book, there's a scene where he's trying to figure out how he feels about the upcoming ceremony of 12s. And he's very fixated on like what they refer to as precision of language. So not using hyperbole and finding just the right word to say that he was feeling apprehensive, which is a very large word for a 12-year-old to be like, this is how I feel. So there's a certain extent to where they're in touch with their feelings, but really not.
Yeah. I feel like the biggest difference between the way that they talk about feelings in the family versus what Jonas experiences in the memories is like the body sensation of feelings is like the actual feeling of the feelings and the strength of them and the complexity of them. The way that the family units talk about feelings is very like front brain kind of, I am explaining to myself what was going on in my thoughts, really. Whereas what Jonas experiences when he gets the memories is like a full body sensation that he is not used to. And when he brings the concept of love to his parents, oh, it's so sad when he asks his parents if they love him and they get mad at him and they laugh and they're like, you need to be more precise. And they're like, do I enjoy being in your company? Yes, but that's more like a thought. Like, I like being around you, or like, I am happy. I take pride in your accomplishments. You know what I mean? It's less like it's less physical, I guess. Than like you try to explain love to someone. It's like, I don't know. I just feel it in my body. I don't know what to tell you what it is.
Yeah.
Part of the cause of that is that when they're like 10, 11, 12, right around puberty, they start taking a pill that turns all their feelings off. So it's a very deliberate choice on the part of the community, but the people taking the pill don't know what it's doing.
It's just like, this is your coming of age thing. Like,
yeah.
Oh, I like mom and dad both take a pill. Like, I take a pill. Like, I'm grown up. I can do it now.
Yeah.
But, you know, reading it from our outside point of view, you're like, ah.
Yeah.
Because he is first given the pill the first time he has basically like, I don't know, a sexual dream.
It's
barely
the tiniest hint of a sexual dream.
They call it the stirrings.
Yeah.
Which I think is really funny.
It's like he wants a girl that he thinks is cute to get in a bathtub or something.
Yeah, like he had previously, like the day before, went to the home of the old, or the place of the old people, basically, and he volunteered for the day. And there's a little bit where they explain, like, in their community, it is not, you know, shameful for children to be naked in front of their parents or whatever, or for old people. Like, it's just very like, oh, this is fine. They're just old. They're basically like babies again. They're like children. Right. And so he like bathes an elderly woman. And so that kind of like informs the dream later. You kind of get what he's imagining now.
Yeah. And so then they're like, oh, well, it looks like it's time for your pill. And then at a certain point, he stops taking it because he kind of gets an inkling of what it's doing to him after he's learning these memories. And the connection that I made primarily is like the emphasis in whiteness on brain over body, you know, like thinking is more intelligent, is like a higher order of processing the world and dealing with the world than emotions, that emotions are weak, that emotions are volatile and vulnerable, and that your ability to not feel them makes you better and stronger and a, you know, higher order of being, basically, and logic over, you know, emotions in terms of decision making and understanding the world and etc. There's a particular detachment from the body, partly in white Christianity, you know, the sins of the flesh and all that.
Like the body is bad and we need to overcome it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like the head needs to overcome the heart kind of thing. But you also see that reflected in Western philosophy as well, of this like really big emphasis on your neocortex.
I think, therefore I am.
Yes, absolutely. Like, you know, we've picked apart Cartesian logic to no end, and like no one really likes it anymore, but that gets to the heart of where Western philosophy starts, is like, start with, what am I thinking about? That's who I really am.
I
and
feel
so
like we need a footnote here of like Mike McHarg's this You're a Miracle and a Pain in the Ass. He's got a great section where he basically gives like a chronological history of like how the prefrontal cortex has like taken over in Western thought. I can recognize a lot of things you and I are both saying are like straight from that book. So I'm like, footnote 1.
Yeah. A lot of, I feel like that should be a footnote on every single episode we do, is like a lot of our ideas are informed by the research that Mike McHarg shares in his podcast, The Cozy Robot Show, and in his book, You're a Miracle and a Pain in the Ass. So that should just be an eternal footnote. Like, a lot of our thinking in our friendship is like informed by that. So yes, but I just think that sense of suppressing the body in order to maintain control in over yourself, and then how that eventually extends to other people. If you don't know how to deal with emotions, other people's emotions are too chaotic, and it's like you need to control them too. So that's what I see in this book.
Okay, so in the community is the idea of sameness with a capital S.
Yes.
Sameness. And this is seen in how, not only how people like act and, you know, how they talk about the feelings, they do it in a very similar way, always trying to be the same, but also how they look. And you realize it takes a while into the book. I only knew it because I'd already read the book before, but it's a ways in that you realize that there's no color in this world, or that people don't see color. Which even that phrase alone should kind of like, this makes me think about the idea of I don't see color when talking about race.
Yeah.
But
foreshadowing.
Yeah, foreshadowing. You realize it's kind of like all gray, like there's light and dark, like they can see shades, and but the first time Jonas sees color, he's like, whoa. So this idea of sameness, which kind of just washes everything, like when you try to make everything the same, you lose variety and difference and the positive things too. Not just, we want everyone to get along, let's try to make everyone the same. Like all diversity is pretty much written out. The only diversity there is in intelligence. And you see that in the assignments, and there's still, even though they're trying to create this utopian society, a hierarchy of this is good and this is bad.
Yeah.
And that's only in the people we see who made it, who didn't get released as an infant or for being too different. And there's not a far jump to talk about eugenics when it comes
absolutely not.
to The Giver.
Absolutely not. You get the sense that like everyone who makes a mistake, like there's a pilot who flies wrong, he gets released. He like makes one mistake and he gets released.
Yeah. So the pilots are never supposed to fly over a community, and Jonas flashes back to a memory of a time when a pilot had flown over there, and there was an announcement. Also creepy. There's announcements that everyone can hear because there's speakers in every single room. Saying like the pilot has been released. Like it was just an error. He flew the wrong way. The pilot has been released, and everyone's like, "Oh, sigh of relief."
Yeah.
Even though it's like, oh, you just like murdered someone because they flew the wrong direction.
Yeah, they made one mistake. And the child Gabriel that Jonas's father is taking care of, he's a little behind developmentally, and his father petitions to like give him an extra year to see if he can adjust and meet certain developmental standards. And the reason Jonas leaves the community is because Gabriel still hasn't met the standards that he needs to that second year, and so they were gonna kill him. And Jonas is like, oh, hell no. And he rescues the kid and takes off. Because the kid, like, doesn't sleep all the way through the night. When he's, like, 1 year old, he's a little fussy and he's a little small and, like, you know, things that, like, you would see in children all the time.
Yeah.
You know, because every child is different. Something that's even more sinister, I think, to me, was Jonas's best friend Asher is, I think, has some sort of, I think it's supposed to be a version of like dyslexia, some kind of learning disability where he gets words all mixed up in his head. And so he says things wrong. And one of the rules of the community is precision of language. You have to say exactly what you mean. And if you say a word wrong, you get punished. And so when he was like 3 years old, he accidentally called a snack a smack. Like he replaced the N with an M, which is like the easiest mistake in the world to make. And they punished him so much that he stopped talking for a while. And eventually he started talking again, but he still has this trouble. And Jonas has this kind of apprehension of like, what if my best friend is gonna be put in a not very good job, or he's gonna be shunned by the community because he can't say words right? And there's this very sinister kind of segment where the chief elder who's like publicly shames Asher, but it's meant to be like endearing, telling this story of how he stopped talking as a 3-year-old because he kept making mistakes, and everyone sort of chuckles like it's this lighthearted thing, and I was fuming. I was like, so that part was so upsetting to me. And he's given, I guess there's enough positive qualities about him that they're like, it's okay, he can stay, and they give him a job that fits him and he seems happy. But like, there is a very strong message of, if there is anything different about your brain, anything that's not totally up to snuff, you're gone immediately. Mm-hmm. With the old people, babies, anyone in between who makes a mistake.
Yeah, it's basically like a three tries and you're out when it comes to like major mistakes. So we see this idea of sameness playing out when it comes to behavior and or child development. Yeah, like even like differences like learning disabilities. And we also, to me, the connection here with the metaphor for whiteness and dominant culture, specifically whiteness, comes from the idea that whiteness on its own is this myth that we've put together of like people with this range of skin tone are all the same thing, right? And people with this other skin tone with more melanin, it's different, and it's black or it's brown or it's not white. But like whiteness isn't like a trait, right. Like our ancestry comes from Europe, and we on some level, you and I know that our ancestors came from different parts of Europe, but they at one point immigrated to America. We all just kind of lumped ourselves together and be like, we assimilate in. We're like, I'm white, treat me like all the other white people because the white people are treated well here. I'm no longer German or Polish or Scandinavian. We're white, and we kind of erase our differences to become same, and then we lose really much sense of cultural heritage beyond the American narrative that we continue to feed ourselves of American exceptionalism and individuality and manifest destiny, all those wonderful American myths that we hold on to so dearly. So that made me think about, that was kind of the element of whiteness that came up in this when it comes to diversity, because they pretty much eradicate it in their society as much as possible. And there's, like you mentioned, punishment for people who don't and reward for people who do kind of continue to fit into this sameness. The one time that Lois Lowry actually addresses race is actually in a memory that Jonas is given of an elephant dying. And this is when he's introduced to mourning and grief, because another elephant comes after one has been poached, basically, and the tusks...
it's like ivory poaching.
Yeah, they like take the tusks off the elephant. The people leave, this other elephant comes in and grieves. But in that story, he notes that he noticed that there's men with darker skin and men with lighter skin. And it seemed to be like something of note for him. So it doesn't seem like in their sameness that there is any diversity of skin tone, though he can't really see color. So it's like gray, just colorless. So it's, race is like hinted at, that's a thing of the past that they're just trying to cover over now with their community of sameness, because racial differences cause tension. Though she doesn't go as far as to describe the tension of racial differences.
Yeah, and you also, like, based on the way she describes all the people, they must be some sort of light tan or beige kind of color, but they're all a very similar color. So it's not like there's a bunch of different skin tones and they just pretend they don't exist. It's everyone's the same color. And she specifically says that Gabriel has blonde hair and his friend Fiona has red hair. So, like, these are definitely white people. You know what I mean? Like, there was a period where I felt like, if the like a film version of The Giver should have a variety of races, and they just pretend they don't exist. But I'm like, no, actually, this definitely just all white people.
And the giver, the character of the giver even points out that Fiona's red hair is kind of like a mistake.
Yeah.
Like, he kind of like chuckles to himself, like, oh, they've been trying to get rid of, red hair for so long, and it just keeps coming back.
Mm-hmm.
So you can imagine that everyone's got, like,
brown hair, brown eyes.
Yeah, just kind of neutral. And then we did talk about there's some elements that feel a little problematic.
Yes.
But the fact that people who are kind of like Jonas
mm-hmm.
and the giver have lighter eyes,
mm-hmm.
Kind of alluding that they were probably blue or something like that.
And Gabriel, as
well as there's like a 4-year-old or a 7-year-old in the community, who also, because he noticed like there's one other child who has the light colored eyes that he does, and they're like are friendly because like, oh hey, friend, same. But those are the people who can like see beyond and like have this like special ability, this
so it's
lighter, like, more Northern Scandinavian features.
Yeah,
or Northern European features.
It's a little dicey. Like, I understand she probably needed a way for Jonas to be able to distinguish that they were different without color being involved. And so, like, there needed to be a different shade, basically, to give you some indication that, like, he and Gabriel and this other kid are, like, connected and different in some way. But I feel like there's other ways to do that besides, blonde hair, blue eyes.
Yeah. It's like, the chosen ones. And you're like, oh, someone else thought that too.
Oh, yeah!
That wasn't good.
That's really running counter to the narrative that you're telling, Lois. Maybe you should rethink that. I think one of the strongest cases of seeing this book as a critique of whiteness is the suppression of memory and the suppression of history and kind of the rewriting of our collective narrative of who we are. They basically took memories out of everybody and put them all in one person who has to suffer all the memories of all time. Like, not just the concept of them or the knowledge of things that happened, but like the physical experiences of war, of starvation, of like Christmas in Germany, like like the physical experience of those things is all in one person, and so he's sort of a library of memory that they can consult occasionally if they really need to, but they specifically tell him, like, don't tell us any details, just tell us what we should do about this. They do not want any information about what he knows. And that rings so true with the way that in order to uphold this myth of whiteness, this myth of colorblindness, you have to completely erase history from your own mind, and you can't pass it down to your children, and you have to, like, create this new narrative, basically.
There's also this phrase that comes back often with Jonas and the Giver, where they say, and back, and back, and back, and back. And that's how far things go. This is from old, this is from back, and back, and back, and back. That's how long this has been happening. And I think sometimes the argument that the community makes when they don't want to make change, like, it's a joke of, like, oh, maybe we can put a request in to get the rules changed, or like, oh, we'll have a committee work on that problem and see if they come up with a solution. It's, like, laughable because, like, this is the way things have always been. And I think when we talk about, like, this is, potentially an example of how whiteness to the extreme, this is what it could look like, is that a lot of times we will say, well, this is how it's always been. When it's not. Some things have not always been this way. There's people who have made choices, and we continue to enshrine things into our policies and our laws that make our country racially unequal. And we will point and say, like, well, that's just the way it is. It's how it always is. There's that aspect of the community. I guess I'm trying to say two things here at once, so let me peel these apart. So one thing is that's the way it's always been. The other is this and back and back and back and back of our history and our, like, generations of trauma and wisdom kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And we can't, like, draw a line in the sand and say, like, okay, now we're doing this new thing and nothing from before informs us. Jonas and the Giver realize that everything they're doing and all the decisions they have to help the community make have to be informed by generations and generations farther back. So this community in the novel has found a way to draw a line so they can continue to say this is the way it's always been without actually having to look back very far. While Jonas and the Giver know and understand, and it's their job to understand the context too, which they live in.
Man, this makes me think of Attack on Titan. Woo! Anyone who's seen it, you know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but I just got a very strong flash of like, oh my god, this is the plot of Attack on Titan. I would highly recommend it. Victoria has no idea what I'm talking about.
I'm just shrugging over here.
She's like, I don't know. This suppression, I think, I could be wrong about this. This is a theory I'm creating right now. Stems from the need to suppress the concept and experience and fear of death.
Mm-hmm.
And by extension, pain. But primarily death. Because the concept of it is completely erased from the community. They call it being released. And the myth that they tell about it is that you are sent, quote unquote, elsewhere. Which is just what they call outside of the community. So they don't correct anyone's false understanding that they go somewhere else. They're still alive, but they move to a new community or a new place that's better for them. And the kids come up with all these stories about like what might be happening to them. And so no one has any understanding of death. And even Jonas's father, who releases a child, puts him in a box, and he thinks of it. It seems like he thinks he's putting the child to sleep, basically, and puts them in a box and sends them in this like chute. And he doesn't seem to realize what he's doing, that the kid's never gonna breathe again, you know. My theory is that is really at the heart of why they did all this, was to eliminate all conflict, all pain, all suffering, all like unpleasantness, and that the solution was not acceptance, like in a Buddhist tradition, you know, of acceptance and release, or in a tradition that's more sort of earth-based, you know, of like giving the circle of life and like returning things back to the earth and receiving from the earth and like the interconnectivity of everyone. Instead of using those solutions, they said, we're shutting it down! Everything is turned off! We lose all joy, all fun. Something I've had to learn about my own emotions is like when you can't selectively shut down feelings, you know? So my major coping strategy growing up was dissociation, to turn everything off. And that turned off a lot of my positive experiences in addition to the negative ones. So that's the solution. We don't even want to know death is there.
Yeah.
And that's removes a lot of the meaning and connection and history that and humanity that they have the potential to experience.
Yeah, we can see how this all connects, like going back to the suppression of feelings, like you were talking about, how people don't really feel real love for each other. There's like, you know, camaraderie, pride, whatever, some kind of surface level of emotions. But once the kids are grown and like are kind of doing their own thing, the parents get moved to their own different house to live with other adults, and you don't really have contact with your parents. And the way at least Jonas perceives it as a 12-year-old and what he's been told is that like, oh, you're just busy with your own life now. Like, you don't have time for your parents. And so then there is no real sense of loss or grief when your parent is then released, because you haven't had contact with them, really. Right. Maybe you've seen them around the community, but they haven't been an integral part of your life for probably decades. And so when he is at the home for the old, he speaks with a woman, and she was like, oh, we released so-and-so today. And they read like a whole thing about his life and all the great things he did for the community. And then he was gone. But the only people who were there to like say goodbye before he like walked through an ominous door, and on the other side was injected with like whatever shot that they used to kill him. He's not surrounded by family. And Jonas even points that out later on. It's like, you're not surrounded by your family. It's you're, you know, apart from them. So by like clamping down on those feelings, if people aren't feeling too connected, then they won't it's almost like everyone gets apathetic in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, they kind of write out pain and suffering and conflict. So when they're really trying to create the sameness, you know, maybe one side, they might be thinking to themselves, well, at least we're not creating children who will suffer if we just get rid of them to start with. Mm-hmm. And we're not creating conflict by making people different. We're making them all the same so they don't have conflict with each other. Mm-hmm. Again, it's like trying to stamp down and like push away the fear of death and make it not even a reality for people, because if there's no conflict, there's no war, people aren't killing each other. Mm-hmm.
But there's nothing to fight for in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Going back to your critique of whiteness, in America, Julie and I also very much informed by Smoke It's in Your Eyes, yes, by Caitlin Doherty, and her writing about the American experience around death and dying. Mm-hmm. And we are very removed from it, I would say, particularly in a lot of white spaces as well. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of other communities that are much more connected to their death and grieving, mm-hmm, with the physical bodies. Mm-hmm. And we want to just push the dead body away and be like, you're not here anymore. You embalm it, or you sometimes don't even like look at it again. There's not really a ceremony as much around the physical dying process, mm-hmm, even if there is ceremony around the grief. Mm-hmm. And I would say certain, you know, people have different religious traditions and family traditions that help us through this grief, but a common part is just kind of pushing death away. Like, we don't talk about it. Mm-hmm. It's not something we have to deal with until it's right in our face. And then we're like, oh gosh, I've never been around a dead body before or something. Yeah. And we don't know these things that are not so long ago. Our former generations, our ancestors, knew how to take care of a body. You know, people would die in their homes. They would have showings in their homes. And it was a very family and community and grounded experience. Like, you would go dig the grave for Grandpa because he was getting buried, mm-hmm, you know, back behind the barn where, mm-hmm, all the other tombstones were for the family. Mm-hmm. Versus now where it's like, ship it away, someone else, mm-hmm, deals with it, I don't have to touch it.
Put it in a box.
Yeah, and we kind of disassociate from death, which, mm-hmm, isn't helping us in the long run.
So speaking of death,
mm-hmm,
did Jonas die at the end? Apparently this is a contentious topic in the Bruick home.
This is contentious. So I read it as a very ambiguous ending. He might be fine. He might be hallucinating and dying, mm-hmm, in a wasteland of snow. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Because I do know there are future books with Jonas in it, you could argue he doesn't die because the author keeps him alive for future books. But if you were only reading this text on its own, yeah, I think it's really ambiguous. And, mm-hmm, for a young adult children's book, that's like a big deal to have an ambiguous death. Mm. Like, not just an ambiguous ending, but just ambiguous of like, did they survive? Did they make it? Because Jonas does say he's starting to lose consciousness. He starts seeing things. He realizes, quote, where he's at, and that he's on this hill that he has memories of from the giver, and there's a sled there. And that's, you know, to me, it's like, well, how could there be a sled there? Like, it was just sitting on a hill. But we do know it is kind of a magical world. There are elements that we can't always explain. So. Yeah,
I think as the first book in the series, if you're not, like, you haven't gotten to know her writing style yet and the way that she constructs this world, as I said, the future books get progressively more magical, and Jonas does appear, and like, so it is very possible that the memory of that sled, that red sled, was the exact hill that he came to once he like officially crossed the boundary of the communities, which is an absurd coincidence. Granted, but in the rules of the world she's constructed, it's very possible. Yeah, I agree that, like, if you're not used to the way that she ends books, this can have a pretty... I mean, she's the queen of an open-ended ending, of, like, an abrupt ending. Mm-hmm. All of her books end that way, where you're just like, what? Oh, wait. Hang on. Like, girl does not do an epilogue ever. Like, she's just like,
she's like, I don't know how it ends. You pick how it ends.
The story is over.
We're done.
Which I think is it's kind of cool for children's literature because, like, it leaves so much room for interpretation that a lot of kids don't get. You know, a lot of children's literature is wrapped up in a very nice, neat bow, and she refuses to do that. And it's kind of cool that you have to use an interpretive lens. But I think when I read this book, I completely took it at face value. I was like, yes, he is passing the border. So he is now experiencing the depth of his feelings for the first time because he was under some kind of force field and now he's not. The hill was like the boundary. And that is the exact hill that he had in his memory. He is getting on that sled. There is a community of houses there that are celebrating Christmas because it's snowing. So obviously it's Christmas time. And he and Gabriel are going to be fine. They're probably going to like pass out in the snow, but they're ultimately going to be fine. I was like totally cool with it. As far as I can remember, I was really hoping the second book was going to pick up right where the book left off. I do remember feeling like, but I want to know who those people are.
Right.
Who is when is this happening? Like, who are these people? And what will he find there? And are they going to be like, who the hell is this child wandering in? I wanted to see that, but they didn't really. He's quite old when you meet him again.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
He's like the leader. He's like started his own sort of community for.
So she never addresses
misfits.
like what happens at the end of this book?
From what I remember, it's sort of told in summary how he found it. He like starts a new community of like outcasts and misfits. And it's like a little town, and he's like the elder of it. And I think they give a brief history of how he came to be there, briefly. But I don't remember. They give no specific details about what happened immediately after this, or even like the rest of his childhood. I don't think.
Interesting.
But I was like totally fine with it. Took it at face value, and Victoria was like, "Yeah, my parents were so angry that he died at the end." I was like, "He died at the end?"
Like, is this some Harry Potter book?
Yeah, I was so surprised.
Yes. So we would love to hear what you guys think. What you thought of the ending the first time you read it.
Mm-hmm.
What was your conclusion
of
what happened? I have one small shout out in the book.
Okay.
Is that okay? I have a shout out and a shutdown because there's one thing we didn't talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out to the fact that nurturing is an important paid position in their society. Or not. I don't know how they get paid in their society. I don't know if money's a thing. They do not get into that. But it's like a real job people have where they take care of children. And parents are there as caregivers, but are not expected to like 24/7 care for their child. And it's like built into society that childcare is available for everyone. My shutdown would be the birth mothers are like a demeaned position in society because they, live in luxury for 3 years while they birth 3 children back to back to back, basically, and then work hard labor for the rest of their lives. And Jonas's mom kind of like chastises Lily for saying she hopes she gets to be a birth mother because it's like, no, you don't want that position. Kind of like it's like looked down upon that the people who are literally giving life to their community are just, not esteemed within their community, which in some ways is true to our own world. So that's,
Yeah.
It's not like Lois Lowry went out of her way to come up with that idea that people who give birth to children are not treated as well.
Yeah, we got into a whole side tangent this morning about the logistics of how they conceive children.
Yeah. We're guessing it's some sort of IVF deal.
Yeah, but like, how do they get the sperm?
Yep. When everyone's suppressing all their feelings.
Yeah. There's also no sexual feelings. And why do they still... Yeah, I don't know. It was a fun little side thing. There's some logistics in her world that have some holes.
What do you mean this, 100-page young adult book doesn't fully flesh out this dystopian world and how it works?
Yeah.
Okay, so, recommendations. For people who enjoyed this book, what would you recommend they read next?
I mean, read her entire catalog. Do yourself a favor. Gathering Blue, Messenger, Sun. There's no "the" at the beginning. It's just Gathering Blue, Messenger, and Sun. And the other books of hers that I've read, I would recommend The Silent Boy, The Willoughbys, and Gossamer. And then apparently I have some homework to go and dig up some of her other work that I have missed out on, including The Willoughbys sequel. I'm so stoked about that. Yeah, that's it.
So...
Oh, and Attack on Titan, as I referenced earlier. I actually think that would be a good fit. It's an anime on lots of platforms.
This book made me think a lot about The Era, which is a short story in the collection Friday Black by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brené. Mm-hmm. And I want to say he likely was inspired. Like, I don't know. I feel like he read The Giver, and this is his take. I feel like I even might have read that somewhere, that, like, he really liked The Giver, and this was his take on it.
I think we talked about that, possibly.
Yeah. Go back and listen to our episode and let us know what we said. This book also made me think of another dystopian series that I was really into as a kid, was Matched by Ali Condi. Mm-hmm. I don't remember if it holds up. Maybe it doesn't. But in that dystopian world, it's like a big deal of who you... And it's more from like a teen girl's perspective, because you get like matched with like your future partner at like a certain age. And that's kind of like their big ceremony it's building up to in the exposition. And then this is like not related at all to dystopian novels or short stories, but New York Times The Daily has an episode called The Sunday Read, The Movement to Bring Death Closer, which, if you want a little more insight into some of the stuff we were talking about when it comes to death and dying in America, and where there's a disconnect between ourselves and our loved ones who are passing, and the earth, and a lot of other things. It was a really great episode, reading an article that was written by Maggie Jones. Okay, what are you currently obsessed with? What's bringing you joy?
I recently started an anime called Given, about... It's like a very soft, like 10-episode story about some high school kids in a rock band.
Cute.
It's a lot of acoustic guitar. Very excited about that. I would also highly recommend... I spent a solid hour yesterday lying in the grass in the sun, and I feel like I got recharged, like someone plugged me into the wall and I got a nice little boost. I felt great. I also realized that the masks, large, and if I'm wearing a mask and sunglasses, like almost none of my face is exposed, and my skin is very sensitive and burns very easily. And so I'm seeing this as a plus side to the masks, is actually it protects my skin from the sun. So my neck and my chin will be two very different colors moving into the summer. And then last thing, one of the podcasts we've recommended on here before, called the Red Couch Podcast, they had a segment called Hood Politics, where they talk about politics. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's an interpretive lens on politics that's very approachable. One of the co-hosts, Propaganda, created a separate podcast out of it that has been picked up by iHeartRadio Network. And it's got new branding and like fancy equipment and music, and anyway. So I'm very excited about that for him and his success. But also, you should listen to it. It's one of my favorite political commentary things to listen to. He's got a book out. He has a new album. His podcast got picked up by iHeartRadio. He's doing great. I'm really excited for him.
I'm trying to think. I'm like, I live a life of sameness with a capital S. Just kidding. The only thing I can think about is the fact that I'm flying to San Diego tomorrow, and so I'm kind of currently obsessed with the fact that we can travel again.
Well, your box.
Oh, my box. Thank you. Let me start over.
I'm like, that brought us so much joy.
Yeah. So I am currently obsessed with just the fact that you can order boxes of things and they surprise you with things you like because you took a quiz. Specifically, recently, I got a box from Adore Me, which they specialize in, like, bras and underwear and swimsuits and lingerie, sleepwear. They've got some cute stuff. And, like, randomly athletic wear, too. So I got an elite box, is what they call it. And I wanted a new swimsuit because I'm going to California tomorrow. And I wanted something cute and new to wear on the beach. And so I requested a swimsuit and some other things. And we had so much fun opening it as a... Julia's like, I never have to order these. I just have to sit around while you do it. Like, that's all the joy I need is pulling things out and we're like, what is this? How does this work?
Yeah. The unboxing is all the joy I need.
Yeah,
It's
and
so
you
fun.
like try everything. And Elite Box, this sounds like an ad. It's not. They're not paying me, but if they want to, they can.
Please sponsor us.
They send you the box. You have like 7 days to try things on in the comfort of your own home.
Mhm.
And I was able to like get opinions and be like, what do you guys think of this? Without having to like send a text and like stand awkwardly in a dressing room in a bathing suit while you wait for like, you know, this really long 5 minutes for your best friend to respond to say like, looks good, you should get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And especially when it comes to like bras and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I can't order bras online without knowing what they are. And it was nice to get a box of them and try them on. And I think I definitely would try some other ones because I think my sizing is just different. You know, brand to brand size is different. So anyways, I'm obsessed with boxes.
You are a cat.
Yeah, I'm a cat. I'm sitting in a box. With that, we'll catch you guys on the next episode.
Is Victoria becoming more like a cat? Find out next week.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Book Club with Julia and Victoria. Chime in with your own thoughts and recommendations on Instagram at bookclubwithjv or through the contact form on our website, www.bookclubwithjv.com. Our website is also where you can find show notes for this episode, which include links to any of the recommendations we gave or other tidbits we mentioned. Make sure to follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're currently listening, and leave us a 5-star review on Apple while you're there. This episode was co-hosted and produced by myself, Victoria Bruick, along with Julia Clausen. Our music is composed by Greg Bruick. Our logo was designed by Gabby Febland, and Rebecca Gesney is our project manager. We'll catch you all on our next episode. Happy reading!